Welcome to our program for today. I'm Margie Creamer from Otisco Lake Preservation Association, and I'm also president of the Finger Lakes Regional Watershed Alliance. It has been my honor to work with the very educated members of the Lake Friendly Living Coalition. They have represented the 7 Finger Lakes, as you see on the screen, coming up. They are all just such strong individuals. We have no worry, I think, about our future because these educated people are now really taking a stand for our behalf. I'd also like to thank the Nature Conservancy and our other partners who have been part of our planning for the Lake Friendly Living Week. And so with great honor, I'm so pleased to have with us today Janet Allen, president of Habitat Gardening, a chapter of New York Wild Ones. She is also author of Caring for Our Piece of the Earth and creator of Our Habitat Garden. And the website is www.ourhabitatgarden.org. Today, she'll speak on creating an earth-friendly landscape, a nice follow-up to yesterday's Doug Tallamy's webinar. Thank you, Janet.
It's an honor to be here with you all today, and we're going to be talking about creating an earth-friendly landscape. Now, we all know what the all-American landscape usually looks like, something like this, mostly lawn, free of weeds, a few ornamental shrubs, beds of those pretty annual flowers, and maybe a few small trees. And lots of mulch. When I walk around our neighborhood, I see bags and bags of the mulch ready to be distributed. Even worse, a lot of it's that dyed mulch and sometimes even rubber that's added to the soil. But what is an earth-friendly landscape? It's a landscape designed and cared for in a way that supports life now and in the future. And I'm sure Doug Tallamy yesterday talked about the importance of oaks. It's a place where wildlife can meet their needs. A place that's healthy and joyful for people. This is in the side of my front yard, actually. So is the conventional American landscape earth-friendly? Can wildlife meet their needs? Is it a healthy place for kids, pets, and wildlife? Is it a joyful place to be? Does it provide the benefits of nature and for nature now and in the future? There's lots of problems associated with our conventional landscapes. And first of all, it's mostly lawn. 40 million acres, more than 40 million acres of lawn in our country and more all the time. I took this picture while we were traveling along a highway in Virginia one year. And you've got to wonder why it's worth all the time and effort to create all this lawn and all they see is a 4-lane highway going past. But we have a lot of lawn. So why? Why is it that people feel compelled to have this lawn and how it's viewed as the all-American thing to do? Well, here's a quote about people who didn't conform to that well-manicured look. It is gratifying to know that such neighbors are not numerous, for the example of the majority will soon shame them into decency. That was written in 1875. And so we've really been brainwashed for a long time to think this is the way we should landscape. But you might wonder what's wrong with that. In our efforts to make it greener, to make it all grass, to keep it closely mowed, and make it a constant companion of suburban development, we are unnecessarily contributing to some of the most severe environmental problems facing the world today. And it's from Redesigning the American Lawn book, which is written by some Yale environmental schools professors. Another problem is the use of water. landscapes take 1/3 of residential waters, and in some places in the country, especially the Southwest, we're using glacial aquifers. This is not sustainable. Lawn is the largest irrigated crop in the United States. Water isn't a problem for most native plants. I don't water any of my plants unless I've just transplanted them. Nothing was watered in the native plant beds, and I have some turf grass, and during a drought in the middle of summer, it turns brown. That's why people are watering their lawns all the time. It's really not meant to live here. And you can see the tiny little root system they have, the turf grass has, compared to the root systems of many native plants. Chemicals, another problem. There's lots of health dangers linked to commonly used lawn pesticides. There's just a few of them. And, pesticide chemical companies may say, well, there's no proof of harm. And that might bring to mind the arguments that tobacco companies used for a long time. And if you don't have controlled studies, they can probably say there's no proof, but there's really no ethical way you can do those kinds of experiments. And the interactions among all those pesticides and other chemicals aren't tested at all. Children are especially vulnerable to these, as the early life exposure to pesticides and pediatric cancers, cognitive functions, behavioral problems. A lot of the things used to kill insects are neurotoxins, and then you have these developing brains of children, and it can't be good. And again, you can't perform a kind of controlled experiment that would show proof, but the associations are strong. It was really interesting. A couple of years ago, I saw in this gardening column, someone had written in, and they had a lawn, and they wanted to know if there was something that's fairly safe to use. And I was thinking, is that the standard we really want to use when our kids are on the lawns and we track stuff in, and the kids are on the floor, and then our pets and wildlife and so on? Is fairly safe really what we accept? There's lots of dangers to pets and wildlife. They're on the lawn a lot more than adults are. And even though their smaller body size makes them more vulnerable, they're more exposed. And of course, the soil food web supports plants, which support insects, which supports the whole food web. But those pesticides kill life in the soil. The chemicals are considered to be one cause of insect decline. You might have heard of the windshield effect or the windshield phenomenon, where years ago, if you traveled any distance at all, you might have to get out and wipe off the windshield. When I was a kid, you would have to do that because there were so many insects, and you'd drive along and they get on the windshield. It doesn't happen anymore. Other countries have banned many of the chemicals we still allow today. And people might think, well, I don't use pesticides. I just use weed and feed, which sounds like a really benign kind of thing. But, those include a lot of toxic substances. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the harmful algal blooms. And as the DEC says, pollutants include fertilizers and pesticides from lawns, gardens, and farms. And it's easy to blame farms, but they use per acre a lot less than our lawns and gardens use. And I don't live on a lake, but I know that there's a pipeline from our lawns to some body of water. We all live in a watershed, even if it's far away. So it's going to go there whether I live right on the lake or not. Plants do fine or even better without them if your soil is healthy and alive. No one weeds and feeds the forests. Another problem that we really need to address is climate. And sometimes you'll see information that is based on some studies that people have made that says, turf grass takes up CO2, emits oxygen. It's a plant after all. But when you look at the whole carbon cycle, and this is from that Redesigning the American Lawn book from Yale, it's true that carbon dioxide is taken up by grass, but there's carbon dioxide released by the decomposition of lawn waste, all of the fossil powered machinery, including all those trucks carting around those big lawnmowers that go from house to house, the fossil energy used to pump water, which is significant, and the energy used for producing all those fertilizers and pesticides and carting them all around the country. So on balance, it's really a negative. Lawn might be better than concrete, but I think we can think of a better way. Light pollution is another problem with our yards. We use light as decoration. And of course, astronomers have been complaining for years about how it makes it difficult to see the night sky. And we do lose the benefit of seeing the magic of all the stars and so on. But it also impacts migration patterns, sleep habits of people as well as wildlife, and the overall habitat of birds, insects, and other wildlife. It can even affect plant flowering, because you all know from poinsettias, you adjust the amount of light they get. Well, the same thing happens outdoors as we've increased the light pollution. And there's human costs. The time spent, which is significant, and the injuries. And this was a long time ago when our now 35-year-old son was little. And today I would not let a kid participate in this lawn mowing. It's really too dangerous. And lots of money to maintain these lawns, a significant amount of money. And what bothers me the most, I live in a suburban neighborhood, and the noise pollution, there's never a time when there's peace and quiet. As soon as one person stops, another one starts, and there's just constant noise, and a significant noise. The 85 decibels or higher are considered dangerous, and yet the lawnmowers are really loud. And even worse are all the leaf blowers, and it's especially irritating. And these are things that can be done with rakes or push brooms. Everything doesn't have to be fossil fuel powered. And a real loss that we're finding more and more with research is that spending time in nature is associated with good health and well-being. And we've lost that. And lawn is not nature. I was walking past one of these highly manicured yards the other day, and someone else was walking past in the other direction, and the owner was out there, and this other person said, "Oh, this is so beautiful. It's just like a national park." Well, it really is not at all like a national park. It's like the opposite. Nature is not that way. And really, at the heart, our yards are just too simple. As Talemi says, we don't have just too few plants. We have this, for example, has lots of plants, but too few functional plants that participate in supporting life. As Talemi says, if you have 15 species of plants in your garden and 13 of them are aliens that are toxic to insect herbivores, you have in effect a garden based on only 2 plant species. Too simple. And if you haven't read this book yet, and he has some other ones since, and still very relevant. So think about it. What is the main source of life on the planet? Plants. They provide all sorts of things that we depend on, that we can't do without: air, food, water, regulation, medicines, habitat, climate. But we've come to see plants just as decorations, a way to decorate our yard. And there's so much more than that. As Sarah Stein says, and this is a classic book written, I think, in the 70s. And I was just talking to someone yesterday who was rereading this again and just marveling at how far ahead of her time she was. And I'd highly recommend this, is not out of date. As she says, this is not someone else's problem. We, you and I, and everyone who has a yard of any size, own a big chunk of this country. Suburban development has wrought habitat destruction on a grand scale. To reverse this process, to reconnect as many plant and animal species as we can, to rebuild intelligent suburban ecosystems, requires a new kind of garden, new techniques of gardening, and, I emphasize, a new kind of gardener. You can be that kind of gardener. So what would an earth-friendly landscape look like? Well, as Talmy says, you can flip the default. The current default landscape is everything is lawn, and then you add a few ornamental plants. An earth-friendly default landscape is, everything is plants. Then you add the functional lawn and paths so you can get around your yard. You can have a place for a picnic table or croquet or whatever, but start with the idea that everything will be plants, and then add what you need as to make it a functional place for you. Some strategies for removing lawn. Well, originally, I would just carve a little bit out, just as you might carve a little bit extra from a cake to even it up. So I took the honey, I shrunk the lawn approach. But eventually I dug it out by hand, but there's easier ways. I've since learned too late. You can cover it with cardboard and add mulch on top and let that decay and kill the lawn. You can take the existing planting beds you have and then just join them into one larger bed. And instead of the mulch, those bags of mulch that people buy, why mulch when you can plant? As the Ecological Landscape Alliance says, mulch can help control weeds, maintain moisture, and improve soil health. Yet, for every advantage mulch offers, well-chosen plants are even more effective. And this is some of the wild ginger. This is the native ginger, not the European glossy-leaved ginger that they often sell. And one of my favorites is the native sedum. It's not always in flower, but when it's not flowering, the leaves are very attractive and it's very easy to grow. There's a lot of natives that will do the job. Foam flower, even when it's not blooming. And this is the sedum next to it. It's a really attractive ground cover, something that covers the ground. And it doesn't have to be uniform or a monoculture. In my front yard, I include a lot of different plants, lots of plants covering the ground, and they provide the values of mulch. It's really self-mulched. And there's bloodroot and mayapple and all sorts of ferns and lots of different plants. So what about the lawn that remains? Well, as this book says, they call it a freedom lawn. You mow it only when necessary. It's free of chemicals and fertilizers, and of course, smaller. So you can change your goal. Instead of the perfect lawn that would be on a Scott's commercial, you can make it good enough. It's green and you can walk on it is my standard. Or you can try a clover lawn. We're currently experimenting with this. We're finding that it looks like near the street where we've done it, that it may not be very salt tolerant. So we're still experimenting, but certainly clover can be part of any lawn. It's nitrogen fixing. And so that's one reason you don't need to add fertilizers. When you remove excess lawn, that you then have space for plants. the foundation of life on Earth, even space to grow food. And we have a fairly large vegetable garden in the back. We don't have a large yard to begin with. It's about 1/3 of an acre. We're on a corner, and a typical suburban kind of area, an older suburb, so it's not these 2-acre lots at all. But even then, we have quite a bit of space to grow food. We have excellent soil because we've added compost, and we get a lot of food out of our relatively small area. And it's the most, the healthiest food you can get. It's grown locally, it's organic. We know where it's come from, and you can pick it and eat it within half hour of picking it. So it's a great use of space. And it also helps with the climate to not be carting food so far. The goal is to have a diverse, layered landscape filled with native plants. And this is a view in our backyard, and you can see there's an herbaceous layer, there's shrubs, there's understory plants, and there's canopy trees. We have a lot of maples. They don't all belong to us. They're in the neighboring yard, but we have quite a few large trees. We have understory trees. This happens to be a cherry tree and amelanchier and pagoda dogwoods. And then this is our habitat hedgerow. We have a bunch of shrubs. And the herbaceous layer, we have a kind of a meadow type area in our backyard with a lot of flowering plants. And don't forget the ground layer. Life on Earth is sustained by this underground ecological system, the soil food web. There can be more microscopic organisms in a teaspoon of healthy soil than there are people on the entire planet. It's really critical to sustainability. Sarah Stein again says, I must have been living in another world when I wrote only a few years ago, and with considerable satisfaction, of the view from my window of our gardens, bare to their bones, neat and clean, nicely edged, weed-free. Why was I not replacing in their beds the limp bodies of weeds I had uprooted? What I was doing, cutting flowers to the ground, raking them away, bagging grass clippings, blowing autumn leaves from underneath the hedge. Now I see that there is teeming life down there that neatly and cleanly I was starving. I was robbing the life savings from my garden beds, exposing them to the elements to leach their lifeblood away. Dead plants feed soil life, and we leave all our leaves on the planting beds, not on the lawn, of course, but we have very little lawn. We just rake that off into our planting beds. It's basically nature's version of a slow release fertilizer. A lot of organizations like the Xerces Association have been encouraging people to leave the leaves. And I created these signs based on the Xerces signs, and I just added their text in larger type, and I display these in the yards in the spring and fall. So hopefully people will begin to understand that this is really important to leave the leaves. Unfortunately, we have a new threat to our soil, Asian jumping worms. And this is what happens to the woods when we have these worms. Now, the European worms have also been a problem, but the Asian jumping worms are even worse. But our forests and trees evolved with a duff layer anywhere where there had been glaciers originally. And it changes the whole the soil that trees are growing in our plants. This is the difference it makes without worms and with worms. It's already making a big difference. And even in home landscapes, I was listening to a webinar on invasive worms, and this person was saying that it even seems like the root hairs are less in landscapes infected with worms, and that he could just pull plants out more easily because they weren't attached as well with the heavy worm infestation. So designing your earth-friendly landscape, of course, one way is to hire a professional to create the design or design it and install it. And just be careful, confirm that they really know about native plants and natural landscaping. I think all nurseries and landscapers know that people want native plants and natural landscaping, but they may use the words and they may not actually deliver a real a landscape that really does have native species. Clearly communicate what you want, and we encourage species, not cultivars. Or you can just design your own. There really is a lot of help with that. Carolyn Summers' book. Sarah Stein also wrote Planting Noah's Garden. And then, of course, the Rick Dark and Doug Tallamy book on the living landscape. And the first priority is preserve and protect existing native trees. Now, if you have a bunch of Norway maples, you might want to take them down, but native trees are really important to have, and it's not something you can create instantly. And remove those non-native invasive plants because they will spread, maybe not even in your yard, but spread to natural areas. Like Baltimore Woods has a lot of Japanese barberry and so on, because birds eat the berries and then they fly over these natural areas and poop out the seeds with the little fertilizer packets. And it's a real problem. You really don't want to be contributing to that. And yet that's what is often sold in stores. So here's some tips for designing your yard. First of all, figure out what you actually have to begin with. I know when I started, I wasn't able to identify everything that I had. A lot of the things were here before we moved in. So it's very instructive to figure out what you actually have. And I did used graph paper and actually measured out everything. Another way is to take a photo and then you can print it out in grayscale, and then you can just label all the things on your in your current landscape. So you know what you're starting with, and you can update that every year. So it is a way of keeping track of what you have where. And observe. They say the best design tool is a lawn chair. And we did spend some time before we got started keeping track of where the sun was at different times of day, what the yard was like in different seasons, what kind of weather we had, and so on. So we would know what would be appropriate plants to include. We also observed nature for inspiration and for guidance. One year we were camping in the Adirondacks, and we really spent a lot of time observing streams because we were about to create a stream and pond in our yard. And we wanted to make it as natural as possible. So we learned from watching nature. And we've really enjoyed this. This was our 25th anniversary present to ourselves, which is, we've now been married 44 years. So we've had it quite a while. And we've really enjoyed it. And the wildlife has too. But it was based on nature, not just these ornamental ponds. Another tip is to start small. You don't have to do it all at once. Do it in phases. You might want to have an idea of what you want it ultimately to look like, but most people can't really do it all at once. And there's a lot of advantages. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's faster. You can learn from your small successes and small failures. And it gives you and others a chance to get used to a different look. So you really don't have to do it all at once. And it works for plants too. This plant, which is now larger, it's a Kentucky coffee tree before it's leafed out, was started by our son. Our son got Kentucky coffee tree nut and planted it when he was in nursery school. And, before he was out of high school, it was a really large tree. I wish that we had planted an acorn now, because oaks are so much more valuable than a Kentucky coffee tree, but this, at the time, we didn't realize that. A lot of people will say, well, you know, I don't want to plant a tree. People move around a lot, takes too long to grow. I won't be here to enjoy it. Well, you can enjoy it at each stage. If you can enjoy a 5-foot bush, you can enjoy a 5-foot tree. They grow faster than you think. And remember, we're planting for future generations, not just for ourselves. Plant in drifts. You know, nature, and this is the image of a sycamore tree, but you can see the kinds of patterns that nature has, and you can try to think of that in your planting beds, to have those drifts and to create a curving border, and have the shrubs and so on kind of placed at random, a grouping of a particular kind, but it doesn't have to be in a row. That's not how nature works. And then, of course, plants. And there's so many advantages to native plants. So why native plants? Native plants can support up to 29 times more living things. And Talamy has done so much of the research that actually shows how important it is. And originally, when I first started about 20 years ago, I was planting trees because of their berries. And of course, that's important too. But I never thought about the fact that it's not just because of the fruit. A lot of insects need native plants. That's what they evolved with, not the non-natives. And I think everybody by now is familiar with the idea that monarchs need milkweeds. That's the only thing the monarch caterpillars can eat. But there's other insects as well, even other kinds of butterflies. They all need their own. This is American lady butterfly in its own little case it makes for itself. And that's on pussy toes or pearly everlasting or a spice bush caterpillar. Many, if not most, commonly sold plants are not native, and they can even be invasive. The Japanese barberry, the burning bush, but lots of others, Norway maple, even the purple forms are the cultivars of Norway maple. And some are marked native in these big box stores. If they're native anywhere in North America, they're distributed nationwide. So sometimes you'll see a plant labeled native, but it may be native to the Pacific Northwest. That's not native here. And favor the species, not cultivars. I have some New England Asters, and I have a cultivar of a New England Aster, and I've been observing these plants. On the species, just the plain species, there's lots of insect visitors. On the cultivar, you know, no bees were seen there. Some cultivars might have some insect activity, but you never know which ones. And as Talamy says, you know, he favors the species. You know, that's what they need. And especially locally grown, from locally collected seeds, the local ecotype. And we've been fortunate that the Plantsman and Amanda's Garden and some others have collected local seed and grown our milkweed, especially from those local seeds. And that's the best you can get. Be careful sharing plants. Our organization always had a plant sale where we accepted donated plants, but now we just have to be a lot more careful and maybe bare root them. Even if you don't see actual worms, there could be the cocoons and so on. Our plant sale doesn't include donated plants anymore. You still have to be careful with plants you get from nurseries, but you just have to be really careful. And we have a link to a really good fact sheet that one of Cooperative Extension produced. And it tells you how you can stop the spread, and it gives you a place to report your sightings. And one of the people who've spoken to our group is Dr. McKay at Colgate, and he's doing a lot of the research on these jumping worms. So it's really important to be knowledgeable about these worms, because it is a very serious threat. Limit hardscaping. Unfortunately, in my area, people are cutting down lots and lots of trees, and they're putting in swimming pools, they're putting in hardscaping. And once you've sealed that soil, I say the phrase is soil sealed is soil lost. It's really hard to recover healthy soil. And we're covering so much of it. We're destroying the soil structure. We're destroying life in the soil. The UN estimates there's only like 60 years worth of topsoil left in agricultural areas, but we're also losing it just in regular areas. There's lots of roads, and the footprint of our houses destroys soil. But now we're going beyond our house into the land outside our house, and in losing that soil, essentially, even though it's under there, it's not healthy soil anymore. And limit lighting. If you need security lighting, you can have motion sensor lights. That's what we have. And if you're worried about someone coming up, it turns on the light when it's necessary, but the lights aren't on all night, which is really a big problem. Now, I've had my landscape enough years now, and this wasn't a problem for 10 years or so, because I just was planting little plants. But I see now the landscape changes over the years. Plants grow, sometimes a lot. Plants multiply. Plants die. This is all really to be expected. I think people get these plans and have 5 of this here and 2 of this here. But after a few years, that's not going to be true anymore. Things do change. And light conditions change. Maybe there was a tree creating a lot of shade. Maybe that tree dies or comes down, and all of a sudden you have sun. Or a tree grows, and all of a sudden you have shade where there had been sun. This is normal. Things change. As Carolyn Summers says, just as creating a garden is a process of learning by doing, so is maintaining it. Let your gardening practices evolve as you observe how your garden is used by humans and wildlife alike. And then a really important thing, I think a lot of people think that what we're advocating in my group, Wild Ones, is to just stop taking care of your yard, just let whatever grows. Well, first of all, you're going to get a lot of non-native invasive plants, but that's not what we mean. And if you live in a suburban area like I do, you really need to keep it as attractive as possible, consistent with a healthy landscape. Now, I found one of my favorite plants is this flowering raspberry. I like the flowers. The bumblebees love the flowers. The catbirds love the little flowering raspberry berries and so on. But I soon realized that this one little plant I started with would take over the whole yard. And again, I have a very relatively small amount of space. I just couldn't let it keep expanding its range. So what I've done with these enthusiastic plants, they're not invasive plants, they're native plants, but they are pretty enthusiastic, is I've just established policies for these different plants. For this one, I've decided it can go as far as the edge of the porch and no more. So I don't have to make any decisions. When I see part of it expanding beyond its allowed range, I just cut it off or dig it up. It only can be in that one spot. And I love having it there. I wish I had more space so I could have more. But in my yard, this is as far as it can go. And it just simplifies things so much. I've decided where it can go. If you have a health strip between the sidewalk and the road, that's a place you can put enthusiastic plants like this Canada anemone, and it's not going to invade your whole yard. And choose plants whose mature space fits the yard. As a beginner 20 years ago, I'd buy these shrubs, and they were maybe a foot tall, 2 foot tall. And so I'd put a bunch of them there. And then eventually they would outgrow the space, which I should have anticipated, but I didn't. But I've learned now that you really have to think of the mature size. So place them where they will fit. And in the meantime, you can grow understory things or herbaceous plants. And as the shrub grows, the other ones will be shaded out or become a ground cover underneath. But I didn't anticipate the ultimate size. So that's something to keep in mind. And I've also had to learn to be ruthless. I did that with my flowering raspberry, but another favorite plant is the jewelweed. That's another plant that is very enthusiastic. I love it because I just like the little flowers. The bumblebees love it. The hummingbirds really love it. It's one of their most favorite plants. But I could have a yard full of nothing but. So I've chosen an area of the yard where it can grow, without being interfered with. If it grows anywhere else, I just pull it out and generally just put it on the ground next to it, because it will just decay very, very rapidly and improve the soil. As the root systems are very tiny. You can just pull out a whole handful with just a slight tug. So it's easy to manage, but the key was to just decide where I'm going to let it be. And if I see it somewhere else, I don't have to think about it. I just pull it out. Are you too busy, too tired, too whatever to create a whole new landscape? The easiest way to make a big difference in the world is to plant native trees. And now we're learning, especially due to Talamy's work, especially oaks that support a large number of insect species. And I just got this new book today. I ordered the Kindle version and it just came out today, but the hard copy has been available for a while. I didn't realize that. So some people have read it. One person I know read it and she just raved about it. She says it's an excellent book. And I just got it this morning, so I'm gonna have to take a look at it. But all of Talamy's works are just excellent. And some native canopy trees live hundreds of years, supporting life for generations of insects, birds, other wildlife, and people. It used to be people would stay on their family's property for, they would expect hundreds of years, and they always would make sure there was a lot of trees and some, maple trees or whatever for the future. And we've lost that sense of planting for the future. But whether a tree is native or not, the dead trees are so important. This is a sign from Cavity Conservation, and you can see this downy and getting some little insects. But our dead trees are full of life. And as the sign says, this dying tree is fulfilling its final destiny, saved for food and shelter for wildlife and nesting birds. I've only seen, of all the trees coming down in my neighborhood, I've only seen one where someone left it at a height that's safe, that I don't feel at all at risk with this tree falling over, and yet it's still large enough to support cavity nesting birds and insects and so on. And if you wanted, you could plant trumpet vine along the bottom or whatever. That's the only one I've seen left this way. And most people, they cut the whole tree down, they grind out the stump, and there's no sign that there was ever anything there. But this took a long time to grow. We need these snags. And it was interesting, the Smithsonian Gardens had a dead tree or a dying tree in their parking lot, and instead of just cutting the whole thing down and grinding out the stump, they cut it to a safe height and left it for birds and insects and so on. And near our daughter's house in Chapel Hill, there's a beautiful walkway. And the last time we were down there, I noticed that in the process of developing this walkway, they knew that this tree was going to die, but instead of cutting it down completely, they left the trunk. And wisely, they also put up a sign to explain to people why they were leaving that and how important it was for wildlife habitat. And it really is not posing a hazard at all. And I'm sure that if the bottom of the trunk became rotten, or they can always take it down if needed. But again, go to cavityconservation.com and they tell you how to leave dead trees so that it is safe for people too. Climate is something we need to address, and Sue Reed has excellent books on climate-wise landscaping, and lots of really good tips in there. Plants can lower energy use and create a more comfortable home and yard in one day. Now, this is part of our front yard. Our front yard is quite shady. And then closer to the street, it's sunnier, where I have my roadside flower bed. And I took a little thermometer and I measured the temperature in each area, and there was a significant temperature difference. Besides just being in a shady area in the front yard on a hot day, it just feels psychologically, it feels so much cooler, besides actually being cooler. And in all of these trees coming down in our area, I just wonder, probably the air conditioner use is going to go way up. The yards aren't going to feel as comfortable. It's a real shame. On the south side, we've planted a lot of deciduous trees. And another thing in terms of climate is to skip the peat moss. I leave my leaves. That provides organic matter right there. But peat sequesters carbon dioxide, mining it releases carbon dioxide, and peat grows only 3 inches a century. We're losing these sphagnum bogs. This is one that is protected in Canada. And also leave space for a solar dryer. I know some HOAs prohibit that in our daughter's first house, she was not able to put up a clothes dryer. Now, in a time when we're dealing with climate change, it doesn't make any sense to use fossil fuel to dry clothes when the sun can do it so easily. It really doesn't take time, much time to hang them up once you get used to it. And they smell wonderful. There's no chemical fragrances at all. It's just a wonderful smell. And it's just a way to use solar energy. And I hang my clothes inside in the winter. I haven't used my electric dryer in, I don't know, 10 or 20 years. And you can be a citizen scientist in terms of climate change. Budburst, which is a project of the Chicago Botanic Garden. You can submit when plants go through their various phenophases throughout the year, and you can help keep track of how those phases may be changing, and that has a lot of implications for insect-plant interactions and so on. Our yards can change. 35 years ago, this is what our house looked like shortly after we moved in. And this is what, a couple of years ago, I've gotten rid of the hostas since then, but that's what it looked like. This is the side of our front yard. We have paths and lots of plants, and our flower border, and our backyard. And this is some of our backyard now, instead of just lawn, and our stream and our hedgerow. So it's funny, I do a lot of, or at least before last year, I did a lot of tours, and it always seems like some people will kind of inch up closer to me and kind of whisper, "What do the neighbors think?" Because, Having a lawn is the all-American thing to do. Well, no one ever asked about this. This is pretty ugly, I think you could all agree. And yet no one would question this. No one ever asked what I think about this. Our whole neighborhood has these yellow signs go up because they're constantly being treated. We're spreading poisons everywhere, which is not good for our kids or pets or people in general, not to mention wildlife. No one ever asked me, does it bother you that there's poisons everywhere? Yeah, it does bother me. No one thinks to ask. As Dark and Talamy says, opting for increased functionality doesn't mean sacrificing beauty. Functional landscapes can be extraordinarily beautiful, but it does introduce beauty of a somewhat different nature. And actually, I love to see the decaying leaves in the yard. It has its beauty all its own. And we always decorate our homes in earth tone colors. The only place we don't want earth tones is out in our yards, I guess. I think it's important to keep the borders neat. That's just, being a good neighbor consistent with what I know to be an earth-friendly landscape. And inform others. I think it's really important to have the signs indicating why you're landscaping differently, and hopefully people will learn something from these signs. These are all available for purchase. And I've done other signs too, and you can download them from my website in the ACT section. And I have a whole bunch of signs, and I feature the one, Welcome to a Grandparent's Landscape, using native plants and earth-friendly practices to leave future generations a living planet. That is the most important thing, the most important reason. So what do the neighbors think? Well, I don't know, but whose opinion matters most? As I say, I try to keep it as neat and attractive as possible, consistent with what is going to leave a living planet for my grandchildren and their grandchildren and beyond. Whose opinion matters most? Be brave. The next generations are counting on us to save their future. As Doug Talamy says, in the past, we've asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. And you can become part of Talamy's Homegrown National Park at homegrownnationalpark.org. And there's lots of ways of learning more. These books that I've mentioned, excellent, but Talamy has his new book, or what had been his new book, Nature's Best Hope, and his brand new book, The Nature of Oaks. The nice thing about the Living Landscape book is it has lots of photos to help you learn a new aesthetic and get used to a different way of what yards can look like. And then our organization is Wild Ones. We haven't been meeting this last year. Hopefully we can resume in September, but you're welcome to come. It's free and open to the public. But if you're too far away, I'd love for there to be more local chapters. And so I'm hoping people will start local chapters elsewhere in the state. You're welcome to sign up for our free twice monthly e-newsletter. Just send an email to info@hgcny.org. It stands for Habitat Gardening in Central New York, and that's the name of our Wild Ones chapter. And so just send me an email. And if you're wondering where to get native plants, we update. This happens to be the cover of our 2018 Native Plant Shopping Guide, but we update it every year, and it shows which nurseries, native plant nurseries, have which plants each year, so you know where to get them. And you can download that for free from our hgcny.org website. And we also have that free 6-session discussion group. It's designed for 8 to 12 people, but smaller or larger groups. can also study it, and or just individuals. It's free to download from our hgcny.org website. And then my own Habitat Garden website. I'm still updating it with new photos and so on, but there's a lot of resources and reflections and so on there. And I'd like to close with E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, who said the worst thing that will probably happen, in fact, is already well underway, is not energy depletion, economic collapse, conventional war, or the expansion of totalitarian governments. As terrible as these catastrophes would be for us, they can be repaired in a few generations. The one process now going on that will take millions of years to correct is loss of genetic and species diversity by the destruction of natural habitats. This is the folly our descendants are least likely to forgive us. So what will be our legacy? Not just for the wildlife. This isn't just for wildlife. It's for our descendants as well, because they depend on this healthy planet just as wildlife depends on it. You can make a difference. Create an earth-friendly, future-friendly landscape. And it's up to you to take the pledge. And it's so inspiring to see so many of these lake communities working on this issue. It really gives me a lot of hope.
Well,
So
thank you
for being here today.
Thank you so much, Janet. And that was a great lead into taking our pledge. It just involves so much more conversation that's happening in our community. So we have some questions for you, some in the chat line and some question and answers. One person early was confused when you said you just let farmers off the hook with the logic they use less per acre. Do you remember that comment?
I think that, and I don't have the statistics, but I've heard that there, and it's not that they don't use anything, but I mean, I think people in their own yards feel like, well, I'm just using a few pounds of this. Farmers and these, acres and acres, they're the source of the problem. I don't think you can just blame farmers. It's not that it doesn't contribute to the farmers, but to some extent, we can't control it except by buying organic food, which I try to do as much as possible, because it's not just for my own health, it's for the health of those farm fields too. But I'm not sure, is that what they mean? I mean, maybe I didn't say that in the best way, but
well, I think that clarified what you meant.
Yeah.
So here's a question from Tim. We live near a lake. Is there any type of certain plants that may be better for water filtration near a freshwater lake?
Well, I don't live near a lake, and so I haven't really explored that as much. Now, there is a new native plant nursery in Skaneateles, and they're also involved with the health of Skaneateles Lake, and they would probably know a lot more about that. It's Go Native Perennials, and it's Mary Menapace and Janice Weil, and that just started last year, and they're in our native plant shopping guide for the first time this year because they've just gotten going, and they're extremely knowledgeable about lakeside things.
All right, thank you very much. Marjorie asks, the Plantsman Nursery in Ithaca, my screen just moved, the Plantsman Nursery in Ithaca grows their own natives and advise on what and where to plant. Dan Siegel is the owner. I learned a lot working with him. So that's just a comment.
Yeah, we've worked with the Plantsman a lot. When we had sales, we didn't have any sales last year, but they always contribute to our sales, and they're very knowledgeable.
Okay, here's a question from Margaret. What plantings can be used that are drought resistant, where there is little sun and water because of maple trees, and will hold the soil when there's worry about erosion? And additionally, the grade is steeper and the soil composition is fill.
Well, Amanda's Garden is an excellent native plant nursery. She has a lot of informational things on her website, Amanda's Native Plants, and that also is in the Native Plant Shopping Guide. And she lists plants for various conditions. And she also, like Dan, is extremely knowledgeable and very nice to work with. And she has those resources on her website for our area. I mean, there's a lot of books that have those kinds of lists of plants for different conditions, but she knows our conditions here. So she also would be a really good one for the, and then if you wanted Shrubs and Trees, Jim Engel from the White Oak Nursery is very, very knowledgeable about the shrubs and trees. And he's west of Syracuse as well, and also in our Native Plant Shopping Guide. But there's so many different combinations of conditions. I personally will tend to kind of push the edges of conditions and try plants out. And I find that a lot of plants tolerate a little bit beyond what their optimum growing conditions are. Sometimes they die. I mean, I just like to experiment, but quite often, even if it is happiest in maybe a sunny, wet spot, maybe parched shade and just moderately moist might do just as well. So I've tried some of those things, and it's also a way of, a really enthusiastic plant. If you give them less than optimal growing conditions, you may be able to have that plant and not have it just kind of take off too much. But I know, well, Ellen Foltz is the owner of Amanda's Garden. I think Amanda is her daughter's name. So Ellen is extremely knowledgeable about all those things, and has a wonderful plants that she grows really well, and we've had really good luck with her.
Okay, next question is, well, from Bill, what was the website about leaving tree trunks?
Cavityconservation.com. And it was started by someone in the, I think part of the Bluebird Society or Audubon in California. And he realized that we were starting to make bluebirds totally dependent on human nest site or human nest boxes. And it's great to provide nest boxes. There's the Bluebird Trail and all that, because they need it at this time. But, humans aren't necessarily a reliable partner in the long run, and ultimately we need to reestablish the snags. Our group did a tour of a local park with the park ranger a few years ago, and of course in the park there were trees that had just come down. They were laying there, and the ranger said, you wouldn't believe the number of people who wonder why you don't clean this up, because it doesn't look neat. Here you are in a forest. These things, whether they're standing or they eventually fall, these are all an essential part of the whole ecosystem. But it's this website, he provides so much information on how to keep them safe, because if you live in an area like I live in, you can't just let a huge tree decay and eventually fall over, because it could fall into the street or something. But there are ways, just as the Smithsonian or the Bowling Creek Trail showed, a way to keep it safe and still provide so much of the benefits of leaving a dead tree. And he gives details for homeowners or for professional arborists and so on. It's an excellent website. And then you can also buy the sign it's funny that I had the sign on my tree and someone was walking down the street and I was in the backyard and I heard her walk down the street and she says, "Oh, a wildlife tree. I wonder what kind it is." Like it was some special species of tree. It was just a dead tree. That's a
gosh.
wildlife tree.
All right, a comment from Maura is, signs are a great way to help inform and show support for our environment. Many of the LFL programs offer signs to those who take the pledge. These signs are often easy conversation starters with neighbors about how to be lake-friendly living. And then from Emily, Cornell Bioswale has great lists of plants that help with filtration. From Margaret, she just is complimentary of so much material. And another great thanks. And I'm going to go over to our questions and answers. So here we have more from Gretchen. How do you get rid of invasive worms?
Well, I mean, that's the problem. And that's the Dr. McKay is working on some of that. When we see them, we keep some jars of vinegar in the yard. When I see any worm, I really don't stop to check whether it's the European or the jumping worm. I just throw them in. But then they stay over the winter as cocoons, so you won't always see them in the spring. We're trying to avoid spreading them to new areas. You can check to see if you have them by pouring a mustard solution, like the dry mustard, to see if if any of them come up, because it irritates them. They stay on the surface. They tend to stay more on the surface compared to the other European worms. But both worms aren't good. The first time I heard about worms being bad was in the Bill Kalina book, and he used to be in charge of the garden in the woods for New England Wildflower Society. And he had a part in his book about worrying about the effect of worms on the trilliums and all that in the woods. This was before we knew we had the Asian jumping worms. So even the European worms were not meant to be here. So I put them all in the vinegar and kill them. I don't like to kill things, but that's, just a real problem. And I don't think there's any real easy solution right now. Last year we had fewer, and Dr. McKay thought it may be because we had a drought. I don't know. I mean, it's good to keep on top of whatever research shows, but basically what we've done is try not to share them with other people. I've stopped. I used to share a lot of plants, give plants away, and I guess if you bare rooted them and swished them in water, because there's the cocoons, I guess it's safer, but it's a problem. Yeah.
All right, a question from Paul. Any downside to leaving too many trees in beds, such as large oak leaves that accumulate thick beds of leaf cover?
I took, because I take everything off of our lawn and put on the garden beds, I took some of the extra off. Plants are pretty good at coming through leaf cover and so on. I haven't seen any problems. That's the way nature has worked for a long time. No one says you have to leave every last leaf. I took some off, and then I put them in a pile. I didn't put them in the bag out to the curb. I put them in a pile near our compost pile, in kind of a fluffy pile, as a lot of our moths and butterflies are living in that. That's one reason we don't have as many moths and butterflies, because they'll pupate and be in the leaf litter, and then we rake it all up and put it out to the curb as as some toxic substance, and so we're losing a lot of of our insects that way, because they're in there.
Right, to reuse. All right, here's from Leslie. What can be done to control jumping worms or eliminate them?
Yeah. I would, check out that fact sheet. I think one of the most important things you can do is monitor it and report when you see them, because knowing the extent of the infestation is something scientists need to know.
So who would you
And
report it to?
IMAP Invasives is one place. On that Cornell fact sheet, we have a link to it on our HGCNY website page. I think it's under the, learn, I think under the fact sheets page. I don't have the fact sheet there. I have a link to it. And then there's also in the Midwest, they've dealt with this for a long time. So they have information on, well, it used to be called Great Lakes Worm Watch, and I think there's a different link to that now. I also have information on my website with links to different things. I mean, there's no real easy solution at the moment, except learning more and supporting the scientists' work in that, and being really careful.
That's our Habitat's Garden.
Ourhabitatgarden.org,
Okay.
yeah.
Here's another one from Julie. Do annuals have a place in the natural garden?
Well, actually, jewelweed is an annual, even though it, comes up everywhere. I mean, they just recede every year. There's no rules. There happens to be fewer annuals that are native plants. Actually, jewelweed is the native version of the impatiens bedding plant. It's actually in the genus Impatiens. I don't know. I mean, there just happens to be fewer annuals. There's one, blue curls, I guess, is an annual. Some are biennials, but I haven't seen. I'd love to try blue curls. That was mentioned in a video that we had in one of our newsletters. But
okay, I have Sonia has a question. To avoid jumping worms, do you recommend removing all the soil from purchased plants, or will that just harm the roots?
Well, one of our other Wild Ones chapters, that's what they've been doing. They've been removing all the soil, and this is for their plant sale, and then repotted all with sterile soil, bought in bags, I guess, that's been sterilized and so on. But, I would think there's less chance if you remove the soil and then swish it in water so it's a bare root. I think some nurseries may be selling more bare roots because of that. We haven't done that, and I just haven't shared plants, and our organization just doesn't accept donated plants. This is not a problem we've lived with a really long time to have come up with any easy answers, but it is significant. There's some interesting articles in the New York Times and other places about how this will impact even climate change, because these will release carbon from the soil. It turns soil into like coffee grounds kind of thing, because they're on the surface and they just process so much of the soil. And it just turns it into a coffee ground like thing. It's, I wish there were answers. I'm not sure there's any certain answer right now. We're still figuring out, which is why Dr. McKay's work is so important.
Gretchen is asking, how do you identify the jumping worms? Do they really jump?
They don't jump, but you can identify them by behavior, because they tend to be on the surface and they wiggle around a lot. They're very kind of hyperactive. And then, that little white band, the clitellum, is closer and in it looks different. And that, I think that fact sheet has a good picture showing those differences. So the behavior is a good clue, though, because they are on the surface. They don't actually jump, but they wiggle around a lot.
Okay. And our last question is, what about ticks in those leaves?
Yeah, I was wondering if because everybody asks that question every single time I give a
Well, we didn't want to let it go this time.
Yeah, well, and Talamy has addressed this as well. And what Talamy says is you could have the whole world be asphalt and lawn and you would not have any tick problem. Is that a world that's going to support life? I know the cooperative extension here is, saying not to have leaf litter and so on. I'm not sure that is a solution that is good long-term. The Pennsylvania Cooperative Extension recommends the best solution is to check yourself every night. And I think the most significant aspect of that is that it indicates our willingness to accept risks from nature. A lot of people are killed or maimed by car accidents, and yet how many of us, think it's worthwhile taking that risk to travel to a mall for recreational shopping or so on? The risk is really great there comparatively, and the risk of pesticides. Not everyone in contact with lawn pesticides is going to keel over and die, but there are serious risks, especially to our kids. And yet no one seems to have the same concern about that. And one of the things I read is that, you have this big wide path between your lawn and any natural area. And kids need to learn that they cannot go into the woods. And as Talamy says, if you're raising a whole generation of kids who views nature as something that's dangerous and not worth visiting, you don't have a generation that is going to be a good steward of the natural world. And where does that lead? We cannot live without nature. We could conceivably live without trips to the mall for recreational shopping or any of the other things, all the sugar we drink. People, I think underneath all that is a calculation that nature isn't important enough to be worth risking anything. And it's true, you need to check yourself every night if you're roaming around in the leaves. But I leave the leaves. I'm not playing in the leaves all day. I have paths. And actually, my husband works, he's a volunteer at Baltimore Woods. And so they talk about this a lot. And I think the bigger danger is that ticks are on shrubs and so on, that, if you brush past, they may attach. I don't think leaves are the biggest part of that, but, you don't have to go in, just leave the leaves. We have paths, we have sidewalks.
Yeah.
And
All right.
really, I think you have to think of the long-term consequences. We cannot live without soil, and we cannot live without stewards of the world and the future. And we need to remember that. And there's risks to everything, and I think that's relatively small. And certainly I recommend checking yourself every night.
Well, thank you. Well, that was a very complete answer, as was your entire report. We're just so grateful that it's just now with different eyes, I will drive on my little journeys around our Western New York area, our Central New York area, and really observe and appreciate rain gardens and different gardens that you see out there. And I hope that we also will implement that in our own little spot here next to the lake. So thank you very much, Janet. That was very well attended. We had 66 here to start the group. So I'd like to finish just by encouraging others to sign up for the other programs coming up. Dr. Allen is speaking about hemlock woolly adelgid today at 1. And we have Dan Siegel, who was mentioned today, speaking about native plants, lake-friendly by nature, tomorrow at 1. And Laura Bailey from Cornell Cooperative Extension will speak about details of aquatic invasive species tomorrow at 6:30. And then we have on Thursday, Camille Marquette of CCE Landscaping for Cayuga Lake Shorelines. And then we have Sustainable Vineyards on Seneca Lake, May 6th at 7 o'clock. So again, the Lake Friendly Living has a variety of programs that we're so pleased so many in the along these 7 Finger Lakes are taking advantage of. Do you have any last comments, Janet?
Well, I'm just inspired by so many people being willing to reconsider how they're landscaping, because this is the most important thing you can be doing for your descendants and for everyone's children, grandchildren, and on and on. This is this is the make or break of the planet, the climate and biodiversity. We've got to work on this stuff if our kids are going to have a future.
Okay, well, thank you for spreading the word, and I think you've got many more that will follow your guidance. All right, thank you to all. Oh, we have one more chat. Let's see. You did get many thank yous. And again, thank you. This is great, many thanks. So nice, thank you. So many people have been pleased.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right, Janet, have a nice day. Thank you all.
Okay, you too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.